Hello and welcome once again to Voices Unheard, produced by Unicorns Live. I am your host, Jessica Samuels. My pronouns are she and her. Thank you for joining us as we once again share the underrepresented voices and stories in our community. And my guest tonight is...
My name is James Sieben, and I will be talking about being a trans man in today's society.
Great. And James, your pronouns are?
He, him, his.
Great, thank you. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded lands of the Okanagan Nation and Syilx people. I'd like to say thank you to our episode sponsor tonight. It's Crucial Wealth Management of Raymond James Limited, a proud member and advocate of the LGBTQ+ community. Crucial Wealth Management of Raymond James Limited is one of BC Interior's premier LGBTQ+ wealth planning organizations. I'd also like to say thank you to Canada Kelowna Hotel and Conference Centre, who donates the space to us each and every week. And I would like to say thank you to show sponsors Kelowna Pride and Castanet Media. Now, back to you, James. Let's have a chat about what being a transgendered male means. First of all, can you give a definition of what that means for you?
So kind of for me, like I was born female, or I was rather assigned female at birth. But always in my head, I knew that I was different from all the other girls in my class. And I just kind of knew that I identified more with boys and kind of saw myself as more of a boy. And so...
Yeah. So you knew you were different and you knew what the difference was.
Kind of. Like I just didn't have the language for it until like way, way later. Like I always knew that there was like, that I was different in some way and that like I identified more with boys. I always wore boys' clothing, did more like boy things like playing sports and all that kind of stuff. But I just didn't have the language for it until like well into high school.
Okay. And high school is an interesting and difficult, painful cringe. Yes, I see a cringe-worthy time for many people, never mind having this sense that they are different. And so what was it about high school that led you to this knowing?
Well, just I think psychology courses really helped. I really give a lot of credit to my teacher, Ms. Hounsel, for that. And then also just like, as you grow older, being allowed more like internet access and whatever, and like finding YouTube videos and things. Like I remember there's one particular BuzzFeed video about like androgynous models, and I was like, well, obviously not a model. But like I definitely kind of identified a lot with the androgynous side and a lot of the kind of female models presenting more masculine. Okay. And then just kind of through school and through like friends being exposed to different queer friends who identified as trans and like were kind of starting their transitions in like about grade 9-ish.
Okay. When did you start your transition?
It wasn't until after I graduated. It was just a year ago, actually, that I kind of came out as trans. And
so talk about what transition means. What is it multi-layered process? What's involved?
So the other thing is that transitioning is so completely different for every single trans and non-binary person who experiences it. First, there's like social transitioning, which would be like kind of asking people to refer to you by a name that you have chosen for yourself, your pronouns, just kind of dressing more in a way that would have you seen as the gender that you kind of know that you are. That kind of thing. And then there's more on the medically transitioning side, which can involve hormones, hormone blockers, surgeries, but there's like a kind of multitude of different ways you can both socially and medically transition as well. Like there are different hormones you can take.
Yeah.
Surgeries, there's like tons and tons and tons. And every single one is slightly different for a particular person.
Right. How was the social transition for you?
At first, it was like, it was really kind of trippy. Like, it made me feel like really happy, and like whenever someone in like some other context, when they didn't know me before I transitioned, would like use he, him pronouns for me and my name.
Like you didn't tell them, like they saw you and they used
definitely not at first.
Okay, yeah.
That made me feel really good. But there's also some like really weird parts about like being a guy that, I don't know, people just, that it was very weird to adjust to, and still kind of have an issue adjusting.
Well, because you're, like you said, you're a year into this.
Yeah.
And so it's very fresh about life presenting and as a woman, and then now being a transgendered male.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly your own emotional journey as well would have been significant.
Yeah. It was a bit wild. Last year, I was going through like a really rough time, and ended up in hospital, and then just through Foundry, was able to kind of like get, I don't know, myself back to a place where I was kind of mentally healthy, and then through the counseling there, kind of like being able to explore kind of all the stuff that I was thinking about my gender identity, and like kind of figure out what exactly everything meant for me, and where to go from there.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, and actually I'll just do a quick disclosure, because you and I haven't talked about this, but I work for CMHA Kelowna, and we're the operators of Foundry Kelowna. And Foundry Kelowna is a youth mental health hub for youth ages 12 to 24 and their families. And I do know that there we have programming and counselors that are specialized in discussing and helping you address challenges associated with being a trans youth. So that was unprompted, so I'm happy to hear that was a good thing. But to have that, you know, you touched lightly upon a mental health struggle with that.
Yeah.
Did you have other support systems in your network, friends, family that were able to?
I'm super lucky that my parents have been as supportive as they are. At first, like, it was really hard for them because they felt a lot of guilt, but now they're just kind of like trying to be as supportive as they can, and like uplifting as they can, and I'm very, very lucky and very grateful for them.
Where do you think the guilt comes from?
I feel like just having a kid who's different, and knowing that, you know, like, being out is an amazing thing, and I would not give that up for anything, but it's also very, very difficult, and it makes your life a lot more difficult in a lot of senses. And so I think they felt guilty for like my mom said that she wished that but like prenatally she could have made me a boy. Like, well, she did, but just in a different kind of way. Yeah.
That's a good way to frame it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just, not in the way that maybe everyone assumes or thinks that it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so you talked about two types of transitioning, social and medical. And is medical transitioning something that's a part of your life, or going to be a part of your life?
Yeah, so I started testosterone in October of last year, and then I have actually top surgery coming up on September 14th with Dr. McKee in Burnaby. So I'm very excited about that.
Mm-hmm. In the transgender community, is I guess there must be degrees of transition. You know.
Yeah, like there's like some people just choose hormones. Some people, like I know some trans guys just do hormones and top surgery. Some do a complete medical transition, but there really is no one way to transition. It really depends on the person.
Yeah.
And just some people may choose to not medically transition at all.
Right.
And they're still valid, and their being transgender as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something you and I had talked about previously, is that validation, that thinking that, or knowing, and the validation from the support of your community and family and resources, that you are valued, and you know, you're not so different that you should be ignored. And so talk about that self-realization as well that you went through.
Well, like, it was just, I got to the point where I was like, I just felt, well, I first came out as non-binary because I felt like that was a good compromise for me to be like kind of more masculine, but also like I felt like I was gonna let a lot of people down by transitioning, like my family and like friends in sports, because it's harder to find women teammates to play in co-ed sports.
Okay.
And just realizing that like that wasn't really kind of how I thought of myself, and just realizing that like, you know, the only way that I'm really going to be letting anyone down is by not being authentic to who I am.
Right. That's an interesting point you make, because you have that element, but then all of the other ways that you could be letting people down. So letting, are you worried that you're going to let them down? Letting female friends down, and then maybe others? Like how much did that weigh on your mind?
A lot. Like, it was something that like, it took me, like I said, I've always known that I was different, and it took me like almost 19 years to like be okay with that, and be okay with kind of what that meant, and how some people might not want to talk to me anymore. And
Did you have that?
a couple people, but kind of, if this is something where someone isn't going to talk to me anymore because I'm being true to myself, then they didn't want to be part of my life anyway.
Yeah. You touched upon earlier, but the weird differences of people seeing you as female and then people seeing you as male, and kind of just the trans community aside, just the very kind of linear gender roles that society puts on both of those categories. And like, there's only two categories out there.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah, share some of your experiences about that.
Well, like even just at work, it just if anyone needs someone to lift something, they pretty much only ask the male employees. And I am so weak. My arms are sticks. Like, I cannot lift anything. It's so awkward being like, I need you to help me lift this rug. And I'm like a little twig arm over here, like, it's not good. No one wants that.
Well, but even, like, it's interesting that you say that, because often I feel that like a cisgendered male would also, that's amount of pressure, right? And I have been that woman in the workplace and even in my house, like, I can't open this. Can you kill the spider? Can you lift let's get the closest male. So you are now keenly on both sides, have been on both sides of that.
I still do not. Am I allowed to swear in here?
Undecided. Sure.
Yes? I do not fuck with spiders, guys. I cannot deal with that. They have too many legs and too many eyes. I will not deal with that.
Too many eyes.
I get my roommates to deal with that.
I think
Anyone else?
Yes, I think we can all identify with the spider thing. So fair. Okay, and then in sport as well, you were talking about that.
Yeah, it was very weird. Well, because my kind of primary sport that I play is ultimate frisbee, and it still is quite binary, but it is a lot more progressive than other sports. Like, there's a lot of people who just, there's a very large queer community and a very large gay community in ultimate frisbee to begin with, especially in like Vancouver and the States. And then kind of before I came out, I'm also on the board for the Kelowna Ultimate Player Society. I put together a policy for trans and non-binary players in Ultimate in Kelowna to feel more welcome and to just kind of safeguard them a bit more, so that the board had a bunch of discussions in regards to, well, what if someone tries to abuse this policy, and like someone who's a cisgender man saying that they match up against women in like a defensive context, and then you can take advantage of that. But like the odds are is that that doesn't happen. Like trans people just want to play sport as themselves. They don't want to deal with like any of that politics. They don't, like, we don't want
You're not trying to get away with something.
we just want to play.
Yeah.
And we just want to play as ourselves. Like, especially, I feel like people don't really care as much about trans men as they do trans women. They're like, oh, well, because they don't really see us as men. They're like, well, you're just, yeah, go compete with the men and see how that works out for you. Because it's a very large gap. Like, a lot of the guys that I play against now have had testosterone in their body working for like 10, 15, even longer years, not like for as mine's like I'm not even at like a year quite yet, and just like different physicality wise and body development and muscle development, bone structure, that kind of thing, and then
And then, so you were saying that there more people are concerned about transgendered women.
Yeah, like I don't, because again, a lot of people outside who are arguing that trans people should only be playing in certain categories that like match up with their biological sex. They don't see like trans women as women. And so they just think of them as like sneaky and trying to get an advantage. But like the truth of the matter is that like once like trans women start taking testosterone blockers and estrogen, like it goes down like fairly quickly in some cases.
Right.
And I know I was reading this. There's this one trans blogger on Facebook who's also a bodybuilder, and she was saying, I don't have testosterone anymore, but I still have this larger frame. And so like I have this kind of male frame that was designed to have testosterone to help like carry it around, but I don't have that anymore, so it's almost like I'm at more of a disadvantage in some respects. And you're definitely at a social disadvantage, because a lot of like there's this argument that like allowing trans people to play sports is ruining women's sport and all that, which just doesn't make sense, because that's not the goal of it at all. The goal is for trans people to just play sports and to be seen as the athlete that they feel they are. Like I'm not a woman athlete. I'm a man athlete. Like I'm a trans athlete. Like that's why I think it's important to have like these kind of policies in place to kind of support trans athletes. Like, for instance, like the International Olympic Committee is like actively discriminating against trans people. And
just in case people are watching and they don't know how they're actively discriminating, this is exactly what you were talking about just moments ago.
Yeah, like not letting like trans women compete in women's sport. Trans men, I did see, we don't really see as much in the media, but trans men, there was definitely a cyclist, I don't remember his name, but was forced to compete in women's cycling and kind of destroyed because testosterone is a bit insane.
So what do you think the balance is? How can we come to resolution with that? Because you're talking a little bit in that example where if there's still some testosterone in the body, or you're talking about the transgendered woman who said that, well, I've got this larger frame, and she's participating in an arena where the larger frame, albeit strength would be a big element of it. A larger frame would be to her advantage. What do you think is the resolution for this? Because this is all pretty new in the world of professional sport. It's not new in the world, but in sport.
Professional sport.
Yeah.
It's difficult because there's no easy answer. Because, like, even going back into like the Cold War era and Russian doping scandals and giving their women athletes, crazy amounts of testosterone so they could compete better. Like, it's very easy to like say that someone is cheating the system, and it's very hard to kind of find a way where, because the thing about athletes, especially professional athletes, who have been competing their whole lives for like this one certain stage, especially in like terms of the Olympics, and you have millions of dollars of like sponsorships on the line. Like, you think, I was talking to my dad, you think about Lance Armstrong, he won all these titles. No one remembers the person who got second in any of them.
Right.
Like, and those people were cheated out of millions of dollars. And that's kind of why people are so hesitant to let trans people in sport, because they think, well, to be perfectly honest, it would be cis people that would be, like cisgender people that would be kind of trying to cheat the system and kind of take advantage of inclusive policies. Like, trans people just want to play sport. We just want to be active and be involved.
Right. So how do the policies show up in Ultimates, and when you said you were forming? So what's some example of some of the policies?
So like the main thing about the policy that I wrote is that it doesn't create any new rules. It just kind of highlights ways that people can act to be more inclusive.
Okay.
So if you, like, for instance, myself as a trans man, I would defensively match up against other men. If you're a trans woman, you would match up against other women. If you're someone who's non-binary, then you would just match up with whatever kind of gender that you kind of believe to be a better suit.
Right. Yeah. And I played a fair amount of team sports and co-ed sports, and I know sometimes you can't always match up to presenting genders or whatever, and so sometimes you're making those assumptions, like, okay, in terms of size and stature, you're just matching up it's sometimes it can be hard, but athletically, who you think you best match up with. Ideally, for me, it would probably be, a woman, of larger stature. But if it's a woman who's 5'2" and I outweigh her by 40 pounds, I also feel that's pretty unfair.
I mean, yeah.
You don't agree?
No.
Okay,
because,
why?
Well, our policy is just, it's based on gender, and that's it.
Okay.
Like, it's not about athletic ability. Like, a woman can't, or we don't really allow women to match up against men to match up against women, because then you get into some of, like, people complaining about situations being taken advantage of.
Right.
So we do it purely based on gender.
Do you always have the same number of gender on? Okay, so that solves that.
Well, yes. Each team has the same. There's a new points rotating system.
Okay.
So the playtime of women and women matching and men matching players is more equal.
Okay.
But yes.
Okay, interesting. Obviously, I find this part really interesting. Get in the nitty gritty. But it's these scenarios, and I think what led us down this path. These scenarios, these everyday things like killing spiders and playing sports and lifting heavy things, that are scenarios that you have to navigate.
Yeah.
And in each of those scenarios, are you saying, okay, hold on here, I'm a transgendered man, so don't make assumptions, and can we do it this way? Or are you going with the flow?
It's so hard because like I also need to kind of be careful because you can't always tell everyone that you're transgender because it's not always safe to do so.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of important in terms of like context of like in certain things, like sports has been a big gap. Like I used to be kind of like more dominant in like women's sports, and now I'm a bit more average-ish. And so just getting used to like people that are a lot faster than me, a lot stronger than me, like that, like the people, my teammates know that and they kind of see it in that context. But yeah, it's really difficult trying to figure out like what exactly to do because people will have different perceptions of you anyway. Because if you say, no, I'm not comfortable doing that, then they were like, why? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, why?
Right.
Aren't you, yeah.
And you're in the position to have to feel like you have to explain or
and then like kind of
justify.
out yourself, justify. I'm always having to justify myself.
Right.
Just having to justify my identity, justifying my actions, justifying oppression, justifying everything.
Yeah. Exhausting?
It's very exhausting.
Right. Yeah. And so how do you stay the course? How do you...
Because you don't have any other choice. Like I'm out now, I'm not, like you can't really go back in the closet once you're out. Like you could, but like it just wouldn't be healthy and it wouldn't be safe, and it just gives fodder to people being like, see, this is made it up the whole time. And
right. You were trying to get away with something. Yeah.
That's
that's the motivation.
Yeah.
What about societally? Speaking about how in society people see the transgender community or transgendered male. Do you think what are some of the misperceptions?
People don't really see trans men, I think.
Right.
A lot of the time.
Okay.
Which can be both a blessing and a curse. Like I do feel it's a lot easier for trans men to like quote unquote pass and look, which means in kind of like trans terminology, passing means like looking like cisgender, looking like you were born that way. Because especially if the trans woman or trans feminine people are transitioning after their first kind of adolescent puberty.
Right.
And so they're, first of all, especially if they're early in their transition, especially after they've gone through adolescent male puberty, it's a kind of what I've heard is that it's a lot more difficult for them. They get noticed a lot more. That's why there's these disproportionate levels of violence against trans women and trans women of color. And that's why they're always in the media. Also, I think it's like some kind of overly sexualized kind of thing about trans women that we don't see as often with trans men.
Interesting, and if I'll get the first photo up, when you're talking about trans men and trans women, and then we were talking about puberty. Here's something that was fairly public, that went down in media. J.K. Rowling here, really kind of off the cuff, put out this tweet. Really, what do you see when you see this? Particularly the people who menstruate. I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. She's getting around the idea that it's women. It's women. So
and not anyone else.
and not anyone else. What we gotta show the. Tell us how you feel about that, James.
Unprompted. Why you?
Yeah.
So, kind of going into my own personal kind of like history with Harry Potter. Like I loved Harry Potter as a small queer child who didn't have any words to kind of like describe myself, my identity. I like identified so much with Harry about how he's like always bullied, and just I wrote Harry Potter fan fiction when I was 9, and like I dreamed of being a great writer like her. And then even like past I don't know, a few months ago when she was like in support of my forestater, I was like, oh, you're a person that I really loved and really cared about and admired, and this is what you think of me. Like, you think we're disgusting. I was like, wow, that really makes me feel great.
Yeah, well, maybe we can show the second one now to kind of show, and this went on for some time on social media. There was an essay she wrote. There's tons of back and forth.
She really, it's just really frustrating because her arguments don't make any sense.
Well, and what's really interesting, and the thought of this, and in underrepresented communities, when people say, I know and love trans people, it's
Girl,
like you
you
can
do
Insert Black people or people of color. It's like some of them are my best friends.
Oh my God.
But just the line where she says that if there is no what is it? There's no sex.
But
then,
we are not denying the fact that sex exists. Mm-hmm. We know sex exists. You should also know that sex exists on a spectrum, and saying it doesn't effectively erases intersex people. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not denying that sex exists. We're also just acknowledging that gender identity exists and is its own completely separate thing and doesn't really have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And just the fact that she was just going, like, what probably pissed me off most about this whole thing is that here is a cisgender, heterosexual white woman who is leading the conversation about trans people when she's being deliberately harmful. Trans rights does not affect her in any single way, and she's like leading the charge. And now all these like trans exclusionary radical feminists are coming up out of the woodwork. And there was like one of Trump's cronies, some senator was like using her essay as this like evidence and proof so that he could propose this legislature to discriminate against trans people. And that's what's so frustrating to me, is that people like her and people like him and people like Mr. 45th, who we're not going to mention by name, are leading this discussion around trans people, and they're not trans, and they don't have anything good to say about us.
Is it that they're uninformed, or think they're purposely doing harm?
I feel like in this day and age, being ignorant is a choice. You can Google anything. You being ignorant is a choice. And you not being willing to listen to all the people around you. Like, Mermaids is a UK-based trans and non-binary support charity, particularly for youth. Okay. They have reached out to her multiple times and being like, we have some representatives who want to get lunch with you and just kind of talk. And she just keeps going on and on Twitter and everything. And that's why I kind of feel that it's not ignorance. It's willful blindness. It's willful kind of driving your own beliefs and driving your own harm on to other people.
It's interesting, that line that you said, willful blindness. Those are such a good pairing of words. And you know, we're talking about JK there, and we're mentioning number 45 and the various individuals. We've got people watching who you know, and I've heard people say it, just, you know, oh, you know, what am I supposed to call people? Like, I don't understand. Is it queer? Is it non-binary? Is it trans this? And just what would you say to them in terms of encouraging them to, and we'll get back to your earlier statement that, look at you, you are a person, you're here, you're talking about all the things that we have identified with as humans, to encourage them to say, don't be willfully ignorant.
Yeah.
Be willfully knowledgeable.
Exactly. Like, it's one of those things, just like seeing trans people as people. And then, like, again, Mermaids has this kind of, it's not a campaign, it's just kind of the side thing, this kind of side point that they have. Don't speak about trans kids unless you've spoken to one. And that, I think, is probably the most important thing. Like, if you haven't sat down and talked with a trans person and kind of gained something from their perspective and heard about why maybe sometimes your rhetoric is harmful, then you need to stop speaking about us, because you like don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like to be afraid walking down the street. You don't know what it's like to be afraid going into a washroom and worrying that you like pass enough and people are going to like are gonna clock you and like start swearing at you and calling you all these horrible names. You don't know if like you're going to be kind of cursed out on social media for just existing and being called the T slur and the F slur and all this crap, and like it just doesn't, they don't know. And so yeah, just like you need to talk to trans people before you talk about us in this way, especially in this harmful way.
Sometimes I wonder if the fear of making a mistake or saying the wrong thing plays a role in that. What can you say to allay those concerns?
Well, like I think a lot of trans people, obviously I don't speak for all trans people, and a lot of us have completely different journeys and have experienced completely different traumas, and they take things completely differently. That's a lot of the same words. But the main thing is that like a lot of us have kind of grown as queer people self-advocating for ourselves. And so if you make a mistake, then we will correct you, but don't take that as an attack, just take that as a learning experience and just kind of move on. Like, part of self-advocating is educating. And the thing for me, there's quite a few trans people who, like, self-advocating is very exhausting. And so by this burnout and this constant, like, especially if you're like a prominent, like, social activist on social media, you get a lot of hate, and you get burned out, and you can get very angry very quickly, and any little thing can set you off. And so it's just kind of important to acknowledge that being a trans person is difficult. Being a trans person of color is like infinitesimally
Way more difficult.
It's way more difficult.
Yes.
And that sometimes like you might have caught us on like the wrong day, but we just want to be seen as people. So just, you can always, also there's so many great resources on Google. Like WPATH, which is the World Professional, I think, Association for Transgender Health. They have lots of resources. PFLAG, GLAD, in BC, Transcare BC, which is amazing. They have saved my life, literally. There's just so much resources out there. So for you to say, like, I don't know, like, it's too much, I don't really feel that that's like an appropriate excuse, because there's lots of videos that are like super basic, like this is what transgender means, and this is like going from like basic terms to like going more into like non-binary and gender fluid, and how gender expression is different from identity, and kind of going on through there into more kind of complex gender themes. But everything's out there.
Look it up.
Yeah. Kind of.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
James, thank you for sharing your story tonight.
Thanks.
It was good to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here for Voices Unheard, produced by Unicorns Live. I'd like to say thank you once again to the Canada Kelowna Conference Centre here for allowing us to be in this space each and every week, Kelowna Pride and Castanet Media. And I would also like to say thank you to our episode sponsor, Crucial Wealth Management of Raymond James Limited, a proud member and advocate of the LGBTQ+ community. Crucial Wealth Management of Raymond James Limited is one of BC Interior's premier LGBTQ+ wealth planning organizations. Thank you so much. We'll see you right back here next week. Have a good night.